Arts and Lectures is grateful for support of tonight's program from the City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Cultural Affairs, the Elliott Bay Book Company, and our co-presenter, North Cascades Institute. The North Cascades Institute seeks to inspire closer relationships with nature through direct experience and has offered environmental education programs for people of all ages for over 20 years. Since 2005, the Institute has operated the North Cascades Environmental Learning Center, located at the base of Sourdough Mountain, in partnership with Seattle City Light and the National Park Service. The Learning Center recently awarded the U.S. Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design Silver Certification, is a field campus set in pristine wilderness. It is the base for many of the Institute's programs, such as natural history classes, writing retreats, group rentals, and the Institute's youth adventures that serve a diverse population of students and connect the next generation to the natural world. Introducing Gary Snyder this evening is North Cascades Institute Executive Director Saul Weisberg. Weisberg is an ecologist, naturalist, and writer who has explored the mountains and rivers of the Pacific Northwest for over 25 years. He worked as a field biologist, fire lookout, commercial fisherman, and National Park Service climbing ranger before co-founding the Institute in 1986. His books include From the Mountains to Sea, North Cascades, The Story Behind the Scenery, Teaching for Wilderness, and Living with Mountains. Weisberg lives in Bellingham, where he is an adjunct faculty member at Huxley College for the Environment at Western Washington University. Let's welcome Saul to the stage.
Wow. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and special thanks to Seattle Arts and Lectures for helping create this evening and so many more wonderful evenings through their great programs. 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to accompany Gary Snyder, his son Kai, writer John Suter, former lookout Jerry Cook and his daughter Carrie, and several others on a boat up Ross Lake, past, as Gary once described it, Sourdough Mountain at the hub of 6 valleys: Skagit, Thunder, Ruby, Upper Skagit, Pierce Creek, Statato Creek. Jack Mountain, the Nahokamine Glacier, Desolation Peak, and Hosamine hovered beyond the edge of the clouds. It was a powerful day for me. I was drawn to the Northwest from Ohio 34 years ago, in large part because of the writings of Gary, Jack Kerouac, Lou Welch, Kenneth Rexroth, and others, poets who celebrated green and misty landscapes and the wilderness, physical and spiritual, that they contained. These poets were changed by wild places, and in turn, they changed the way we look at the world. They put wilderness and wildness back into American poetry. This is particularly true in the Pacific Northwest. This landscape of mountains and rivers without ends, to borrow the name of the title of one of Gary's books, continues to draw poets and ramblers, climbers, and scramblers. And it's important that we continue to work to preserve and protect these special places so that we always have wilderness close at hand in our backyard and as part of our neighborhood. This year marks the 50th anniversary of Gary's landmark compendium of mountain poetry, Rip Rap and Cold Mountain Poems. Gary served as a fire lookout on Sourdough and Crater Mountain in the North Cascades during the summers of '52 and '53, writing some of his most inspired verse on a ridge high above the Skagit River. That young lookout, mountain poet, woods worker, sitting zazen on Sourdough Ridge, was one of the headwater streams of so much that followed. His life has been shaped by hard work, curiosity, deep thinking, scholarship, and the work of building a home and a local bioregional community. Earlier this year, Gary was awarded the Ruth Lilly Prize for his body of work. His previous honors include the Pulitzer, Bollingen, and Levinson Prizes, and the John Hay Award for Nature Writing. Gary was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 1987. In The Practice of the Wild, published in 1990, Gary wrote, The wild requires that we learn the terrain, nod to all the plants and animals and birds, ford the streams and cross the rivers, and tell a good story when we get back home. Gary's been sharing good stories with us for a long time. I believe he has some to share with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Gary Snyder.
Thank you. Gosh, a lot of people came at the last minute. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. And a special welcome to those who came from far away, like distant Bellingham. Strange and exotic Bellingham. North Cascades people. I'm very pleased to be speaking here tonight and touching base with so many old friends and new friends, really. One of the assumptions that underlies almost everything I'm going to be saying and reading from tonight, a combination of commentary, some poems, some prose, is that the West Coast is a long coast, and that the international boundaries are not significant, and the state boundaries are not significant. It's a cultural and biological region that runs from southeast Alaska, Glacier Bay maybe we could say, through British Columbia, on the west side of British Columbia, the west side of Oregon, Washington, and down into Northern California as far as San Francisco Bay or possibly Monterey Bay. It coincides to a considerable degree with the range of Douglas fir. But I'm talking about the west side. The cultural story, the cultural history of the west side is the specific culture of politics and art that we're involved with. And a little caution here, Oregonians and Washingtonians both, if they live in Seattle, for example, speak of Washington as though all of it was rainy. Ditto for people in Portland. But what is striking is the drastic, the radical ecological and weather differences east of the Cascades and west of the Cascades. West of the Cascades is Douglas fir, western hemlock, and red cedar country. East of the Cascades is arid, semi-arid, in all of its varieties. With ponderosa pine in the higher elevation ridges and forests and mountains where it turns up. The Intermountain West, between the Rockies and the Cascade Sierra crest, the Intermountain West is what we should think of as the American West. And that's what the movies are about. That's what Western literature is about. The western slope, the Pacific slope, of the far west, of the coastal west, is a different place that looks off towards Asia, had a huge, in its own time, Chinese and Japanese immigrant population of very hardworking and very skillful people. Still looks east across the Pacific and is engaged in all kinds of cultural and economic exchanges with it, and has been famous for its utopian, radical, countercultural people ever since the 1870s, in actual fact. It's a history we need to not let loose of. My grandfather, Industrial Workers of the World, a wobbly, homesteader in Kitsap County when it was still a territory, used to soapbox in Yesler Square, Pioneer Square. And I never saw it, but my father told me about it. I want to thank Jerry Franklin and his colleagues for the remarkable work they've done when they were once called the Gang of Four in slowing down the rate of logging and forest extraction on the west side here. There's been many debates, many arguments, and many changes that have been taking place over the years. But that little owl has certainly gotten us a lot of traction. And it's made a difference in the northern Sierra, too, a considerable difference. I don't know if Jerry's here tonight, but I have enjoyed everything I've been able to learn from him over the years. And I want to dedicate my talk and my reading tonight to two people, Robin Blazer and Ron Scollin. Ron was a broadly skilled and focused humanist, professional anthropological linguist who, together with his professional linguist wife, Susie Wong Scollin, did field work in the Canadian Yukon, in the Alaskan Yukon, in Taiwan, in Korea, in China, and in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. He died here in Seattle on the 1st of January 2008 of a terminal cancer. But before he died, he was able, with the help of friends, to finish his re-editing of a collection of Chipewyan, not Chippewa, but Chipewyan, which is a Yukon Athabascan language, Chipewyan texts that have been recited by Francois Mandeville. And this new edition, with a lot of new material in it, is just barely out right now as a new book from the University of Washington Press. And the other person I mentioned is the recently late Robin Blazer, who was an outstanding West Coast literary thinker and poet. He died on the 8th of May in his home city, Vancouver, British Columbia, having become an expatriate during the Vietnam War from California to Canada and becoming a Canadian citizen. He was the third member of the influential Bay Area cultural threesome, which included Robert Duncan and Jack Spicer. The three of them transformed, certainly Northern California, and I would say all of West Coast poetics, and had a deep influence on the poetics of the whole nation. And so he will be sorely missed. So I'm going to open with a little account of a little talk about the differences between the Pacific Northwest, the maritime Pacific Northwest, and Northern California. My first perceptions of difference between the Northwest and California had to do with plants, smells, climates, and landscapes, and views. Once I had moved down to the San Francisco Bay Area, it was a new kind of difference for me. I was a laborer on the docks, 1951, able to afford an inexpensive apartment on Telegraph Hill on an entry-level wage. I shared the apartment with fellow ex-Oregonian poet Phil Whalen, both of us relishing the Italian and the Chinese groceries possible within a few blocks of the apartment, learning to cook new things, smoking Balkan Sobrani Turkish cigarettes every weekend, going up to the Basque Hotel on Broadway, where you get free carafes of wine on the table, all you can drink, and there's a fixed price meal that was more than you could eat. And then on the weekends, we had those happily blasted, multi-gender, multi-sexual parties that for a while had no dope at all. That came a few years later. Only red wine. The Frenchness, the Catholicness, the East Asian connections of San Francisco delighted me. I said once that living in San Francisco made it unnecessary to go to Europe. At least for a young man from a stump farm in northern Washington. I left the Puget Sound region when I was only about 12 or 13 years old at the outbreak of World War II. My father, who was an ex-Marine from World War I, and had his first job in years because of the Depression, got hired by the Veterans Administration to do some kind of work for them down in Portland, Oregon. And so we sold our dairy farm and we moved down to Portland, where what I want to say is that Seattle, as far as I was concerned, up till that time, was basically a Scandinavian place. And all of our neighbors were Swedes and Germans and Japanese. We had several large Japanese farming families, truck farming, plowing with horses near us on the way when we walked to school. And they all disappeared in 1941 following the posting of signs on telephone poles saying, "You must leave." So, the current demography of Seattle is radically different from what it was when I was a boy. That's why I'm saying, being in San Francisco, where you see Italians and French and Catholics, big difference. Not so much now. For a spell, I lived in Berkeley and was a graduate student in classical Chinese, modern Japanese at the big U. And for 2 years, I spent every Saturday methodically browsing the Indo-Tibetan section of the stacks. Then the Berkeley Buddhist Church, with its evening study group meetings, hosted by the lovely Jane Imamura, wife of the priest, was for me one of the friendliest places in town. Kenneth Rexroth once wrote a poem on a 1940s political conversation he had late at night in Sam Woe's Juk, rice gruel restaurant, just above Grant Street in Chinatown. It did not belong to someone with the name Sam, as all the North Beach poets thought. The characters Sam Wo mean 3 harmonies. It stayed open till 3 a.m., and it was still there in February of 2003. Such are the benefits, to borrow a phrase from Kenneth, of a classical education. In accord with the differences of their bioregional landscapes, the cultures are a little different. Northern California was settled by Swiss Italians, Portuguese, French, Italians, Portuguese from the Azores, and some Hispanics, and the Californios, what was left of them, and the native Californians, what was left of them. A Mediterranean population for a Mediterranean climate. The Japanese found a way to make the Great Central Valley, old waterfowl wetlands, into giant rice fields. Most of the lowland rice growing in China came after the conversion of waterfowl wetlands 3,000 years ago. The Pacific Northwest had Finns, Swedes, Norwegians, Germans, and New Englanders, people who liked rain, dark trees, and wooden buildings. And for years, there was a hardcore anarchist newspaper published in Finnish in Astoria at the mouth of the Columbia River. You may remember that. Once I had arrived in Japan by freighter in the spring of 1956 to be a Buddhist scholar, it soon became clear to me that the climate and landscape over there was not at all like the Pacific Northwest, much more like Virginia or North Carolina. Japan is on the tail end of the monsoon climate pattern, which means that the rain falls almost entirely in the summer and the winters are dry. Exactly the opposite of here. You guys don't realize how dry your summer is. because by comparison. You also might be, not be aware of the fact that we get almost as much annual rainfall in Northern California as Seattle gets. Where I live at 3,000 feet on the west side of the Sierra Nevada, our average rainfall is 52 inches. However, it all falls in 3 months. In big, heavy storms, January, February, and March. And we have a 6-month drought. I mean, a true drought. So that's the difference of that. I figured all that out eventually. When I settled in the Yuba River country of the Sierra Nevada, already 39 years ago, I was able to adapt fairly easily because I had already worked as a logger in the open forests on the east side of Oregon on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation, and I had already learned to be at home with ponderosa pine and manzanita. Still, it took a while for me to get serious about preparing for wildfires that really would come. I finally got serious about fire breaks and underbrush removal, put in a pond, got a pump, got lots of fire hose, got some Nomex jackets, and some old Forest Service type backpack pumps, because for too many years, like all of my neighbors, I had an irrational faith in the California Division of Forestry and the air tankers, which I assumed could stop any fire from the air in short order. But then we realized, because we saw it happen, that all of the firefighting air tankers disappeared to go on some other forest fires down on the Ventana coast. And if we'd had a fire where I lived at that time, we would have been literally toast. So this takes me back again to the topic of fire. California is under the sign of fire, but also under the sign of flood. A great Sierra-wide fire will come, and so will the flood that will make the great Central Valley into a lake again, as it was during one winter in Sutter's time, when everything from mountain lions to rattlesnakes retreated up into the Sutter Buttes. Flood and fire are perfectly natural. Earthquakes are too. East Coast critics of the West Coast like to pretend that we have no stress or danger here, and that makes us shallow and hedonistic. But here on the West Coast, everybody has some natural disaster to prepare for. These things are beyond left or right, good or evil. Since everything is impermanent anyway, we can say that our looming fires, floods, and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions give a kind of impartial stability to life. Natural disasters are what some folks call acts of God. I wish we could say the same for our changing administrations and the fecklessness of some of the leaders that we seem to elect. The experts, the geologists, the hydrologists, the silviculturalists, have been telling us that the best way to prevent forest fires is to start a lot of little fires every year. Reduce the underbrush. That's true, certainly in Northern California. The best way, and also it's true all the way up to Roseburg, the best way to prevent great floods is to take down the levees and let the water gently wander. In ancient China, this would have been approvingly described as following the Tao. In present-day China, arrogant and blind, what with the Three Gorges Dam, this would be seen as sheer madness. That was a little thinking about the differences. One of the differences that I noticed when I first went down to California, when I was 9 years old, on the train by myself to stay with my aunt and uncle and go to the 1939 World's Fair, was this strange smell, which turned out to be eucalyptus. Totally unfamiliar. Now I'm going to come up to the North Cascades, and I'd like to read a few poems going back to my lookout days. Starting with this one, modeled in a way on the Chinese poetry that I had been learning to translate as a graduate student in Berkeley, where there was only one other student in a graduate seminar with a very eminent Chinese professor for the whole semester, because nobody wanted to study those things in those days. And then the CIA started secretly paying the department or somebody to study Chinese, and there were more students. Mid-August on Sourdough Mountain lookout. Down valley, a smoke haze. 3 days heat after 5 days rain. Pitch glows on the fir cones. Across rocks and meadows, swarms of new flies. I cannot remember things I once read. A few friends, but they are in cities. Drinking cold snow water from a tin cup. Looking down for miles through high, still air. That was 53. I wasn't able to get a lookout job in 54. I was going to be south of Mount Rainier in the Goat Rocks area on a lookout. And I'd actually gotten to the ranger station and already bought my food when the district ranger down there, got a phone call from Washington, D.C., said they had to fire me. I was on some kind of a new FBI list. And he was very concerned and unhappy about that. He said, but I have no choice. I said, oh, I know what it's about. Don't worry about it. So I hitchhiked over to Eastern Oregon and went to work logging. But for a while, it took a while to get a job logging and to get back to where somebody would actually hire me. So this is a little poem called The Late Snow and Lumber Strike of the Summer of 54. Whole towns shut down. Hitching the coast road, only jippos gave me rides. Running their beat trucks, no logs on. Loggers, all gone fishing. Chainsaws in a pool of cold oil on the back porches of 10,000 split-shake houses, quiet in summer rain. Hitched north all of Washington, crossing and recrossing the passes, blown like dust, no place to work. Climbing the steep ridge below Mount Shuckson, clumps of pine float out of the fog. No place to think or work, drifting. On Mount Baker, alone in a gully of blazing snow, cities down the long valleys west, thinking of work, but here, burning in sun glare, below a wet cliff, above a frozen lake, the whole Northwest on strike, black burners cold, the green chain still. I must turn and go back, caught on a snow peak between heaven and earth, and stand in lines in Seattle, looking for work. That didn't work. So that's when I hitchhiked to the east side and got hired on by the Warm Springs Lumber Company in the Ponderosa pine logging on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation. And I had just enough skill to get hired for that kind of thing. Having grown up out in the country, up north of the city didn't go that far in those days, and working with my father, learning how to handle a two-person saw, didn't have chainsaws then, learning how to split with a wedge, and how to use a froe to split shakes. That was just enough to get me onto a logging crew as a choker setter. From Myths and Texts, a series of poems that come out of some of that experience in Eastern Oregon, and my ongoing studies of classical culture and history, and reading the Old Testament. The Groves, this is from Myths and Texts, a book called Myths and Texts. The groves are down, cut down. The groves of Ahab, of Sibella, pine trees, knobbed twigs, thick cone and seed. Sibella's tree, this, sacred in groves. The pine of Zeami, the cedar of Haida, cut down by the prophets of Israel, the fairies of Athens, the thugs of Rome, both ancient and modern. Cut down to make room for the suburbs, bulldozed by Luther and Weyerhaeuser, crosscut and chainsaw, squareheads and fins, high lead and cat skidding, trees down, creeks choked, trout killed, roads. Sawmill temples of Jehovah, squat black burners 100 feet high, sending the smoke of our burnt live sap and leaf to his eager nose. I was a little bit bad-tempered then. In the last 25 years, I've been working out the details of how to do a little logging myself and how to do it right. And working with Forest Service people and working with private landowners in the Ponderosa Pine Country of the Sierra. And I've been involved for some years now in a long-term project to try to describe and define 500-year sustainable forestry, not just 100-year. And the people at Sierra Pacific Industries, SPI, that I know said, when I said, I want to see somebody come up with a 1,000-year forest plan, they said, that's too long. I said, well, what would you settle for? They said, well, since most forest plans are only for 20 or 30 years, what about 100 years? I said, I'll compromise with you at 500. Well, everybody is so new out here. You know, nobody's been here, okay, I gotta walk. Be careful what I say. Non-native people have not been here much more than a couple hundred years at the most, which is no time at all. Consequently, they can't imagine longer time spans. But all you have to say to somebody is, well, look at Italy. They've been doing what they do for a couple of thousand years easily. 1,000 years will come before you know it. Might as well start thinking now. Well, this is what we're going to have to learn. It's part of what we're going to have to learn as we become, as I like to say sometimes, no longer displaced Europeans or whatever, but natives of Turtle Island. Born again as a native of Turtle Island. Thank you. And along those lines, one more poem from Myths and Texts. The text and the myth. Here's the text. Sourdough Mountain called a fire in, up Thunder Creek, high on a ridge. Hiked 18 hours, finally found a snag and 100 feet around on fire. All afternoon and into night, digging the fire line, falling the burning snag. It fanned sparks down like shooting stars over the dry woods, starting spot fires, flaring in wind up Skagit Valley from the sound. Toward morning it rained. We slept in mud and ashes. Woke at dawn. The fire was out. The sky was clear. We saw the last glimmer of the morning star. The myth. Fire up Thunder Creek and the mountain. Troy is burning. The cloud mutters. The mountains are your mind. The woods bristle there. Dogs barking and children shrieking rise from below. Rain falls for centuries, soaking the loose rocks in space. Sweet rain, the fire's out. The black snag glistens in the rain, and the last wisp of smoke floats up into the absolute cold, into the spiral whirls of fire, the storms of the Milky Way, Buddha incense in an empty world. Black pit cold and light year flame tongue of the dragon licks the sun. The sun is but a morning star. Thank you. Come on, you humanities folks. Who said the sun is but a morning star? Huh? Thoreau is right, yes. It's the, it's the last sentence in Walden. And he opens Walden with the comment, the morning star is not a star. He closes with it, the morning star is the sun. That the sun is but a morning star. Now moving out from homeland on the West Coast, I worked for some months in the engine room of a tanker. 1958, taking a break from the Zen monastery in Kyoto and getting up to Yokohama by train, and then going into a bar that I had been told about, a Japanese bar that I had been made aware of, where you go through past the drinking people and into the back room, and that was a hiring hall with a blackboard of ships in Yokohama Bay that needed seamen. So I was able to sign on to a tanker, and 45 minutes later, I was in the boat going out to the harbor, going up and onto the ship. Then I signed the papers and found out that I had signed on for 9 months. Carrying nothing but oil. That was our cargo. Well, the other cargo was the deck cargo, and the deck cargo was sheet steel, plates of steel, flat rolled out steel in those days. Oil, soft rain squalls on the swells south of the Bonin Islands late at night. Light from the empty mess hall throws back bulky shadows of winch and fair lead over the slanting fantail where I stand. But for men on watch in the engine room, the man at the wheel and the lookout in the bow, the crew sleeps in cots on deck or narrow iron bunksways down below. The ship burns with a furnace heart, steam veins and copper nerves, quivers and slightly twists, and always goes. The easy roll of the hull and deep vibration of the turbine underfoot. Bearing what all these crazed, hooked nations need, steel plates and long injections of pure oil. Little did I know how true that was at that time. And from Mountains and Rivers Without End, just one short poem here as I was evolving my thinking. That came to me in the desert of Central Australia with Nanausakaki, the wandering Japanese poet. We ended up being out there together, and I looked around and made this little poem up right on my tongue called Earth Verse. Wide enough to keep you looking, open enough to keep you moving, dry enough to keep you honest, prickly enough to make you tough, green enough to go on living, old enough to give you dreams. I'm going to do it again because, this might end up being like the Pledge of Allegiance in a few centuries. Wide enough to keep you looking, open enough to keep you moving, dry enough to keep you honest, prickly enough to make you tough, green enough to go on living, old enough to give you dreams. Earth Verse. With an exclamation point.